If you live anywhere in New York State and your rent is based on your income, you have a Section 8 voucher, or you're sitting on a waiting list hoping for one, you need to know what is being discussed right now at the federal level. There are proposals on the table to cut housing funds, change how the vouchers are run, and even move more control down to the states. For New York, where rents are high and waiting lists are long, these changes could impact tens of thousands of families, seniors, and disabled residents. In this video, we're going to walk through how vouchers work in New York today, what federal proposals are saying about 2026, and what all of this realistically means if you live in New York City, Long Island, or upstate. Before we get into the details, I want to hear from you. If you are in New York State, tell us in the comments. What city and county are you in? And are you currently on a wait list or already using a voucher or income-based housing? Your answers help other viewers see what is happening across the state. Please also like this video and subscribe to Social Security Post, because in the coming months, as Congress argues over the 2026 budget, we will be tracking every major update that could affect housing, SNAP, SSI, and Social Security for people in New York. New York's main rent voucher for low-income renters is the Housing Choice Voucher Program, commonly called Section 8. At the state level, it is overseen by New York State Homes and Community Renewal, in HCR, but the day-to-day work is mostly carried out by local public housing agencies such as city housing authorities and county housing offices. The voucher program is designed to help the lowest income households, seniors, disabled people on fixed income, displaced families, and some homeless individuals afford safe and decent housing on the private market by paying a portion of the rent directly to the landlord. The Public Housing Agency receives its funding from the Federal Housing Department and then signs an annual contributions contract to administer vouchers according to federal rules and the state's administrative plan. Under this system, a qualifying household in New York rents from a private landlord. The housing agency approves the unit and rent level, and the family generally contributes around 30% of its adjusted monthly income toward rent, with the voucher covering the rest up to a local payment standard. The 2025 statewide administrative plan explains how New York sets those payment standards, how it screens applicants, and how it prioritizes groups like veterans, domestic violence survivors, and people at risk of homelessness. New York has also begun implementing a separate state-funded housing access voucher program focused on people in shelters or at immediate risk of homelessness, which runs alongside the federal Housing Choice Voucher Program. That means New York renters may be touched by both federal funding decisions and state budget decisions at the same time. To qualify for vouchers or income-restricted housing, households have to fall under federal income limits that are updated every year. For 2025, the Housing Department uses Area Median Income, AMI, to define three main categories: extremely low income, below 30% of AMI, very low income, below 50% of AMI, and low income, below 80% of AMI. These limits are different in each part of New York because rents and wages differ across the state. For example, in the New York City metro area in 2025, the 30% income limit for a family of four is listed at $48,600, the very low income limit at $81,000, and the low-income limit at about $129,600. In a smaller metro like Rochester, the extremely low-income limit for a family of four is closer to the low $30,000 range, which shows how much more expensive New York City is than many upstate areas. Because the voucher formula requires families to pay about 30% of adjusted income toward rent, those limits matter a lot for real people. In high-cost areas of New York, especially New York City and some downstate counties, rents have grown much faster than incomes. So even families with vouchers can struggle to find units where the total rent falls within the payment standard. The program allows families in some cases to pay up to around 40% of their income at the initial lease-up, but that extra burden can be risky when utilities and food costs are also rising. For extremely low-income New Yorkers, especially those living only on SSI or a small Social Security check. The voucher is often the only thing standing between them and homelessness, because the private market rents are far above what they can afford on their own. Now let's talk about the 2026 federal budget proposals, because this is where the big risk comes in for New York. The current administration's budget request for 2026 proposes cutting overall funding for the federal housing department by about 44%, reducing rental assistance programs by more than $30 billion nationwide. For New York specifically, housing policy groups estimate that funding for federal housing programs would fall from over $8.7 billion that was obligated in a recent fiscal year down to roughly $4.8 billion, which is about a 46% cut. That money currently supports around 500,000 households across New York through vouchers, public housing, and housing for the elderly and disabled. A cut of that size would not just reduce future expansion, it could force housing agencies to shrink existing programs or stop backfilling units when current tenants leave. The same budget proposal also includes a policy shift to convert critical programs like Section 8 and public housing into state-controlled block grants rather than open-ended federal entitlements. Under this model, New York would get a fixed pot of money and then be forced to decide how to divide it between different housing programs, even if actual need keeps rising. On top of that, the administration has floated the idea of imposing a 2-year time limit on rental assistance for non-elderly, non-disabled households, a change that national reporting suggests could put housing at risk for around 1.4 million of the poorest renters in the country. In a state like New York, with high rent levels and long wage stagnation for low-income workers, a strict time limit could push many families out of stable housing before they are realistically able to afford market rents on their own. New York is unique because there are multiple large agencies running vouchers in the same geographic area. In New York City alone, there is the City Housing Authority, the city's Housing Preservation Department, and the state agency, all administering vouchers within the 5 boroughs. Those agencies try to coordinate policies so landlords see similar rules no matter which program they work with. But the demand for assistance is so high that waitlists often stay closed for years. Recent analysis from New York housing advocates shows that about 206,000 vouchers are used in the city, and that nearly 30% of those vouchers are concentrated in just 3% of the city's neighborhoods. Mostly historically Black and Latino areas like Harlem, Brownsville, Mott Haven, and Far Rockaway. In some of those communities, more than a third of households rely on vouchers, which means any disruption to funding would have serious local impacts. Outside New York City, the picture looks different but is still challenging. Smaller public housing agencies in places like Long Island, the Hudson Valley, the Capital Region, and Western New York manage much smaller voucher pools, and they may have fewer staff and less capacity to absorb sudden federal cuts. A 2025 state administrative plan for one upstate program emphasizes outreach to landlords, payment standards, and tenant screening rights, showing that local agencies are already working hard just to keep units available and in compliance with inspections. Some areas have very tight rental markets with few vacant units at voucher rent levels, while others have lower rents but fewer landlords willing to participate. New York state law protects tenants from discrimination based on source of income, which includes vouchers, but enforcement can still be uneven, and families often report being turned away once landlords learn they use rental assistance. If you are already in a voucher unit in New York, the most important thing you can do right now is make sure your paperwork and contact information are completely up to date with your housing agency. That means reporting any changes in income, household members, or contact details within the required time frame, and carefully reading any letters about annual recertification or inspections. The state's 2025 administrative plans stress that failure to respond to notices, missing recertification appointments, or refusing inspections can lead to loss of assistance, even when the funding is still there. You should also be aware that the Federal Housing Department has updated its inspection model in recent years to focus more on health and safety issues inside the unit. which means landlords may be asked to fix more issues to keep a voucher contract in place. If you are not yet on a voucher but hope to get one, your steps will be different. Many New York housing agencies have their waitlists closed, but some open briefly, especially for targeted programs like state-funded housing access vouchers or special sets of vouchers for homeless individuals, veterans, or domestic violence survivors. You should check with your local housing authority or county social services office to ask whether the waitlist is open, whether they have any preference categories, and what documents you would need if it opens again. When income limits rise, some people who were slightly over income before may suddenly qualify, particularly in areas where the 2025 income limits increased. In a tight budget environment, being ready with paperwork and responding quickly when lists open can be the difference between getting on the list and waiting several more years. Looking ahead, there are a few big things viewers in New York need to watch very closely as we move toward fiscal year 2026. First is the final decision on the federal housing budget. Will Congress actually approve a roughly 44% cut to the federal housing department? Or will lawmakers scale it back after pressure from cities and advocates? Second is whether the proposal to convert programs like Section 8 into state-level block grants becomes law. If that happens, New York will receive a capped allocation, and state leaders will be forced to choose between funding vouchers, public housing, senior housing, or other programs. That could mean fewer new vouchers issued, more competition between programs, and less flexibility when economic conditions worsen. Another trend to keep an eye on is the winding down of special pandemic-era housing vouchers and emergency rental programs. The Federal Emergency Housing Voucher Program, which gave out time-limited vouchers after the health crisis, is already running out of funding earlier than expected, and assistance for many families is projected to end by mid-2026 in New York. Some local emergency rental assistance programs have already exhausted their funds and are struggling to replace them because of federal grant disruptions. All of this points to a tighter funding environment where regular Section 8 and state programs may be asked to do more with less. That makes it even more important for renters to protect their current assistance, follow the rules carefully, and stay plugged into any new opportunities that appear at the local level. So to recap, in New York State, the Housing Choice Voucher Program is still operating under current rules, with income limits and rent formulas that protect the lowest income households, seniors, and disabled people. For now, funding for 2025 is in place, and vouchers are still being paid. But the proposed 2026 budget would significantly cut federal housing funds, push more responsibility onto states through block grants, and even add time limits for some families. New York, with its large public housing system and hundreds of thousands of voucher users, would be one of the hardest hit states if those cuts went through as written, with estimates suggesting funding could fall from over $8.7 billion to about $4.8 billion for key programs. If you live in New York, I want to hear from you. What county are you in, and how long have you waited for a voucher or income-based unit? Have you noticed any changes or delays from your local housing authority this year? Share your experience in the comments so other viewers in New York can see what is happening across the state. And remember, we will keep following every major update on housing, SNAP, SSI, and Social Security that affects you. Make sure you like this video and subscribe to Social Security Post. And don't forget to comment your city and county so we can target future videos specifically to what New Yorkers are facing on the ground. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.